All right. Well, it's been a while, and I'm very happy that Sorush remembers where we left off. So let's maybe before we start this, explore around this section a little bit. This section has to do with basically the state of the soul. So these questions are about, well, these chapters, the questions focus on the progress of the soul, the relationship between the soul and God. And this particular one is the progress of all things within their own degree. So what we usually do is we take turns reading paragraph by paragraph, and then we come back to it and read the paragraph again and try to understand the essence of that paragraph. And then once we do that with all the paragraphs, we try to create a picture of spiritual reality from that chapter, from what we learned from it. So is everything okay with everyone? Okay with that that method? So, oh, Iman's online. Very cool. I'd like to create a reading order in no particular order other than that it's whatever I see on my chat screen. So I'll go ahead and write that in for everyone. Let's see here. Swoosh. I have to walk right now. It might be hard for me to do. Okay, no problem. Thanks for letting us know, Iman. Surush, Armelia, Sam, and then myself. So there you go. That's typed in. And with that, maybe you can, Surush, maybe you can start us off.
The progress of all things within their own degree. Know that nothing that exists remains in a state of repose. That is, all things are in motion. They're either growing or declining, either coming from non-existence into existence or passing from existence into non-existence. So this flower, this hyacinth, was for a time coming from non-existence into existence and is now passing from existence into non-existence. This is called essential or natural motion, and it can in no wise be dissociated from created things, for it is one of their essential requirements, just as it is an essential requirement of fire to burn.
It is therefore clearly established that motion, whether advancing or declining, is necessary to existence. Now, as the human spirit continues after death, it must either advance or decline, and in the next world to cease to advance is the same as to decline. But the human spirit never transcends its own degree. It progresses only within that degree. For example, no matter how far the spirit and reality of Peter may progress, it will never reach the degree of the reality of Christ, but will progress only within its own inherent limits. Thus, you will see that however much this mineral may progress, its progress remains within its own degree. You cannot possibly bring this crystal, for example, to a state where it gains the power of sight. The moon, howsoever it may progress, can never become the shining sun, and its apogee and perigee will always remain within its own degree. And however far the apostles might have progressed, they could never have become Christ. It is true that coal can become a diamond, but both are, in the mineral degree and in their constituent parts, are the same.
Awesome, thank you. And that's it, we're finished. That was a pretty short chapter. Before we start breaking each down paragraph by paragraph, is there any particular questions or comments that stand out? If not, we can go back to Sam, and then Sam, maybe you can read this first paragraph again, and or well, yeah, read it, but more importantly, discuss. We can discuss, what this paragraph's about.
Know that nothing that exists remains in a state of repose. That is, all things are in motion. They are either growing or declining, either coming from non-existence into existence, or passing from existence into non-existence. So this flower, this hyacinth, was for a time coming from non-existence into existence, and is now passing from existence into non-existence. This is called essential or natural motion. It can in no wise be dissociated from created things, for it is one of their essential requirements, just as it is an essential requirement of fire to burn.
Okay, and what are your thoughts?
Just that it's interesting that it's like growth is like so, or like the concept of like change kind of is so tied into like the concept of the soul that it's never not changing. I
That's
find that interesting.
And this concept of change, under which law is it bound by? That's in the paragraph.
That would be like the essential or natural motion. Like, is that what you mean? Or
Yeah. This concept that everything is in a state of motion. So we know from physics that everything has a,
Entropy.
yeah, go ahead. Yes, exactly. Go for it. Okay, go for it.
Sorry, I was like, I was wondering if you're looking for the word, but the law of entropy in physics, I learned this from another Baha'i. I didn't learn it myself. I don't take physics. But she said that the state of the universe is constantly moving towards more disorganization. So, no matter how often you try to organize something and how much you want to prevent it, it's just a law of the universe. So that's the same thing as change. Nothing is bound to be the same. Everything will constantly change. And that also reminds me of another Baha'i quote because there was this quote that I learned. It said that, sorry, my other Baha'i friend is calling me just like randomly. I just said, "Can I call you later?" It was one of those iPhone things. There's this Baha'i quote that says that if you're so depressed and you're so anxious, if sadness besets you, don't become don't become so disillusioned by it. And then also if happiness happens in your life, like don't become too overly confident when something wonderful happens, because all shall pass away and be no more. And I obviously said it wrong, but I think that this really helps me because I'm the type of person that doesn't have a good temperament. Like to always be in a state of like acceptance and accepting things for as they are and not trying to prevent things from happening, because everything changes, like how seasons change, people also change. And no matter how depressing a certain thing can be, or not, no matter how challenging it could be, it can also humble us and bring us back to our faith, because no matter how many graduate degrees you have, no matter how much money you have, and no matter how wealthy you are, you will still have problems because you're a human being. You could get cancer. We are not immune from pain as humans. So I think this is really good to like be aware of, like, yourself, be self-aware.
I like that. I like how you tied psychology with physics and spiritual and metaphysics as described by Abdul Baha. I really like that. I appreciate that. Thank you. And yeah, so you mentioned something important. You were talking about entropy, and the thing that drives entropy is this idea that things are not just that they're in a state of motion, but that how they can move, it depends on the degrees of freedom given to that thing. So, for example, a two-sided coin has 2 degrees of freedom, heads, tails. A dice, six-sided dice has 6 degrees of freedom, 1 through 6, right? And the more degrees of freedom there are, the more possibilities of in the idea of entropy that there is. And so it's interesting that in physics, it was actually Einstein that described what's now called Brownian motion, which is that all molecules they're jiggling around, and that you can't stop them from doing so. It's random movement. And in fact, for example, absolute zero, the state where there's 0 Kelvin temperature, is impossible to attain because reaching absolute zero would require, well, heat is measured in terms of the motion of atoms, right? So and subatomic particles. So basically, for something to reach absolute zero, it would have to be perfectly still, and that's impossible. So physicists know that this is, although they don't describe it as such, they understand that, at least intuitively, that motion is an essential part of the material world. And so what Abdu'l-Baha has done is he's extended it to say that it's actually an essential component of all existence, so be it material or spiritual. And so the same principle applies in the spiritual worlds of God, and it applies to the soul as well. And so, and he still refers this as the idea of motion, even though it's not physical motion in the sense of moving from point A to B, but rather he describes this motion as growth and decay, for example. And then in the following paragraphs, he describes it as the evolution of the soul as well. So I find that interesting.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you mentioned growth and decay, and it sounded to me, when it talks about existence and non-existence, it sounds like, instead, to me, it sounds more like composition and decomposition, because that seems to make a little bit more sense to me, because obviously the hyacinth is not disappearing from existence completely, like it's not, we talk about, or a later chapter talks about, like, what has positive existence. I think it's good and evil. Like, good has positive existence and evil does not have positive existence of its own. So it's not that the hyacinth is like going into non-existence, really. It's just like decomposing to the extent that it basically is not going to look the same as it did before. But I think there's probably a reason why here it uses the words existence and non-existence instead of composition and decomposition.
And what do you think that is? You want to further your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure I totally know yet, but I mean, I guess it's either like just to use the exact words that Abdu'l-Baha used, and it was a translation, or it's because, for all intents and purposes, that hyacinth has ceased to exist after decomposing so much that you basically you don't, it turns into dust, I guess.
Anyone else? Sam, Carmelia, Iman, have any idea as to further Surush's thought?
I have some ideas. When Suresh was talking, even though it doesn't really have to do with what he was talking about, I was thinking about how, like, why this tablet is important. Because are they considered tablets? I'm sorry, I don't know if they're even considered tablets, but it's important nevertheless because humans as a whole, they're really resistant towards change, and they don't understand how important it is for them to grow, because if nothing ever changed, we would never grow. So when he mentioned something about they're either growing or declining, either coming from non-existence into existence or passing from existence into non-existence, it reminded me of a caterpillar and how it has a different stage of life. So I don't really know, I forgot the terms, but it's like in a little, is it cocoon? Or I don't know what it was called. And I guess it has like 3 stages of life. Like, we also believe as Baha'is that we have like stages of life. Like, conception, you're in your mother's womb, and then you're living in this world, and then when you die, we believe in that as well. So, um, I think that just anything that exists, it has this same pattern of from a pass from one stage into another stage. And yeah, that's what I was thinking about when he was talking. But
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, the pupa stage, the larval stage. No, is it larval? I think it's larval first. Yeah, then pupa when it's encased in its cocoon, and then it emerges as a juvenile adult, and then a full adult. Yeah, so it's interesting that Abdu'l-Baha is talking about relative existence and non-existence, right? So obviously the atoms that made up the Hyacinthe, they don't disappear, but that Hyacinthe itself is gone, right? So it's definitely a relative existence. And, if you remember, he talked about relative existence. I think it was actually already in a prior chapter. I don't think it's in a chapter to come. But so I think we did cover that a little bit about the difference between absolute existence, absolute non-existence, and relative existence. But maybe we can move on to the next paragraph. And Sam, you can popcorn whoever you like to read next.
Okay. We can just start up with Sarush again.
All right. So this is the right place, right? Yeah. Should I read it again? I'll read it again. This is a very short chapter. It is therefore clearly established that motion, whether advancing or declining, is necessary to existence. Now, as the human spirit continues after death, it must either advance or decline, and in the next world, to cease to advance is the same as to decline. But the human spirit never transcends its own degree. It progresses only within that degree. For example, no matter how far the spirit and reality of Peter may progress, it will never reach the degree of the reality of Christ, but will progress only within its own inherent limits. So, first of all, this reminds me of like muscular atrophy. Like if you're not working out, then you're going to be like losing muscle mass, right? I mean, I'm not a kinesiologist, but I think that's how it works. Like if you're not, going to the gym, if you're just getting older, then you're gonna, lose that muscle mass. I think there was another analogy that I thought of too, but I can't remember. Like if you're not advancing, then you're declining. In any case, so it then talks about how Peter is never going, like you don't it's like parallel lines, right? Like they never cross each other, but they're both going on infinitely. So it's like, I guess in the next world, like, we talked about the 5 types of spirit, right? And how, I guess in a sense, like a plant is never going to become a human, a plant's soul, or like an animal's soul is never going to reach the stage of a human's. I guess in the same way here, we're talking about how a human, or Peter, I guess, is, a little, he's like a prophet, I think. So, might be wrong, but I think, whatever Peter is, like his soul is never going to reach the station of Christ's soul. So I guess this is the station of the manifestation, and how, it's higher than that of other humans. And we're like both infinitely progressing, but they're parallel. So one does not transcend the other.
Yeah. This paragraph is actually central to a particular Baha'i logos, right? Of Baha'i, I guess, and as a scholar, we'll call it Baha'i theology. But and it contrasts with what a lot of people of other religious faiths believe. Not that their manifestation taught that, but rather the people who are, scholars in their respective religions. That's the best that they could come up with. I can think of Christianity as a great example. I could think of Sufi a particular sects in Christianity, I should say, as an example of that. I could think of Sufi Islam as another example of that. And I think it's worth exploring. Does anybody have any thoughts they'd like to share about this paragraph? Maybe some of you can think of what I'm alluding to.
Well, one thing that I noticed, I don't know if this is exactly like the train of logic you're going down, but one thing that I noticed I think is really interesting is it must either advance or decline, because ceasing to advance is the same as decline. And I was kind of thinking about that just in terms of like spiritual development here too, because it specifically says in the next world, but like when I'm thinking about it, I feel like that's true here just in like day-to-day life, where like when I'm really involved with like Baha'i activities, then it's a lot easier to notice like the capacity building. And then like with COVID, for example, I went like 3 years without doing anything. And it's very easy to see the decline in that. It wasn't stagnation, it was actually decline. And so that's what I thought of when I read that part.
Yeah, I've experienced the same thing. I think we all have. I think that's in a way we can also call that maybe spiritual entropy, moving towards spiritual disorder, in that sense. So that's interesting. For me, it's also that, like, if it's not moving, it'll cease to exist, right? And it only has two directions that it can move it. You can either move towards advancement or move towards decline. And then Abdu'l-Baha introduces this concept that, well, you can physically decline. In other words, in the material world, there's physical decline, but in the spiritual world, you can't go in the negative direction, but being still, not progressing, which is an interesting idea, is akin to decline, right? And so, at least for me, the way that I envision this is that if we can imagine that, let's say we're on a highway and everybody's driving roughly the same speed, right? Let's just say the same speed, doesn't really matter. It's just 65 miles an hour or whatever. So if we're all driving at the same speed, then relative to one another, we don't see any, advancement or decline. But we are moving forward. But if we decide to slow down, then relative to another car, that car would see us as declining, right? Even though we are still moving forward. And so the ultimate decline would be if you have car trouble and you have to stop it completely, and everybody just passes you by at full speed, right? So we could be that soul in the next world that chooses not to advance at all, and that entire continuum of souls just keeps progressing and passing us by. And so that's a type of spiritual motion. So relative to them, it's as if we're moving backwards, right? So that's how I see it. And I think that shows about, that also, I think it's beautiful. It shows that there's so much that, like, I guess maybe, I don't know if expect's the right word, but like what God, like there's so much that God expects from us that if you're not making an effort day by day, then there isn't much difference between that and actually declining, because he measures it according to, what you could have done, right? So it's an opportunity cost it's the opportunity cost of not doing anything. I mean, there's people that are in the world that will actively do bad things, and they're definitely on a negative trajectory. But even just waking up and not doing anything at all, when you put it in relative terms of what you can do, then, in that sense, you're a loss. I guess in economics, it's the same as you can either work, make money, not work, but not spend money, but also like just spend money and not work, and get into debt. So it's these three. But if you can make money and if you're not making money, then that's a relative loss. That's an opportunity cost. Just an example. Anybody else have a thought on that paragraph? If not, I would also like to say maybe we can focus on this, and Sorush touched up on this. It goes back to the central teaching here in some answer questions of this paragraph, which is that no matter how here it is, the human spirit, actually everything, right? Every spirit never transcends its own degree. So everything operates within its own kingdom, within its own fixed domain, right? So this is an interesting concept because on one hand, we have motion and evolution towards perfection, but that doesn't mean that perfection or that state of becoming continually more and more perfect, that doesn't mean that you can transcend the limitations imposed upon you, right? So there is no moving from one state of total existence to another state. So, and I find that interesting. And I think that as Baha'is, when we look at the idea of evolution, and it is definitely correct from a material standpoint that our bodies have evolved over time. We need to kind of understand the spiritual implications behind that. Like, how does that affect the state of the soul? Right? So our souls were never, monkey souls or monkey spirits. Not that we were ever monkeys in that sense anyway, but regardless of whatever form our bodies took, regardless of where in the tree of life we branched off and, became fully differentiated, as a primate into human form, that nonetheless, we were always operating with a human spirit, with a human soul, and it just took eons for our bodies over time to actually fully reflect that, right? And that's no different than the development of an embryo, where it's always a human soul. It's never an animal soul. It's never a vegetable, even though it still has to progress through the different stages. So even when it's a one-celled organism, it's not the soul of an amoeba, it's still a human soul. And when it becomes a bunch of tissues, it's not the soul of a jellyfish, it's a human soul. And when it starts to develop what are called the pharyngeal slits, or the remnants of gills, it's not a fish soul of a fish, it's a human soul, and so on and so forth, until it reaches the final form, until it sends into the station which it was destined to attain. But the soul was always at that level. The soul didn't have to ascend to that station. The soul was already there. The body manifests that station gradually, according to the limitations of physical reality. So I find this very beautiful, and I feel that, like, if people that study the other religions, that were they to look at it from this perspective, that it would reconcile both the differences between the thoughts of different religions, but also reconcile the thoughts between science and religion, right? And so you get a really beautiful unified picture of reality that all can agree on, and it's all done so elegantly in this one paragraph. I know we're spending a lot of time on this paragraph, but it's important. But I would like to ask you, like, one final thing. So, for example, you guys have heard of Sufi Islam, right? Do you guys know, like, what the central tenet or belief, I guess if it could be described as one, is of Sufi Islam? Like, how does that differentiate into other schools of thought? What do Sufis primarily believe about the human soul in terms of its or the station of Muhammad? Is it fixed, or is it malleable? Is it the way that Abdul Baha describes that things have a fixed state, or in Sufi, is it that you can transcend your degree and then move to a higher degree? You could take a wild guess.
I have a friend that's Sufi in my program, and I think it's transcending. Because I've heard her talk about the faith on various occasions. So that's what I think. At least what I've heard from her. I'm not sure. I actually haven't really read too much about the religion myself.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, and also Mormons, if you really study their religion, they have this. Well, let's talk about Sufi first. So they believe that Muhammad, Hazrat Muhammad, his peace be upon him, as the Muslims like to say, the Sufis believe that Muhammad was just a regular person like you and I, that he gradually, according to the will and grace of God, he attained this station of prophethood. Okay, so he reached it. So it's a reachable goal. And the reason why they say that is because of particular verses in the Quran about how Muhammad talks about himself, and how he doesn't equate himself with God. He confesses his own utter nothingness and unworthiness. But this is all in relative to God. And as a side note, he's actually doing this to kind of differentiate the reality of God and the manifestation of God, or as he says, messengers and apostles, than from what Christians believe and continue to believe, in which he had to establish that, which their fallacy into thinking that, this idea of the Trinity, right? So in Christianity, there's this concept that Jesus is co-equal with God. He's not God. They'll say like Jesus is not God, but he is it's not even easy to explain, not even a subset, but he's part of a component of a facet, let's say a facet of God. That God has three facets. It's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And they're all three facets of one entity. So that's this understanding of this idea of the triune was thought up in a church, about 100 years, I think, after the passing of Christ. So the idea of the total transcendence of God to such a degree that it's inaccessible even to the manifestations is not a Christian concept. It's not. And then what Muhammad did is he tried to help people understand the lofty, the exalted state, the transcendent state of God. But then they took his teachings and they went in the extreme, in the other direction, which would be that they concluded, okay, well, therefore Muhammad is not inherently special. He was chosen, but it's something that we can all aspire to, right? So Muhammad was trying to say, you can't equate Christ with the essence of God, and certainly don't do so with me. And then they're like, well, if he's not God, then he's an ordinary person. So they spend their whole lives, whether it's in this life or the hereafter, trying to reach that state. And they will tell you that, yeah, I can become a prophet. You could become a prophet, and we can all become prophets. And this is exactly counter to what Abdul Baha describes, right? So I find that fascinating. And same with the Mormons. They believe that we are all actually gods in our own right, and that if we progress far enough in the world to come, that we will eventually reach a state in our spiritual evolution that we're given our own universe, and to create planets, create life. And one of the reasons why it's promoted for Mormons to have a lot of children is because the more children you have, the more so each of your progeny is actually spiritually under you. So you will always be a god above them, your children. So you're a god. It's kind of like, I guess, some kind of a pyramid scheme or something. You're a god, you become a god, and then your children, they will become gods, but you're a higher up god. And in the same way, your parents and grandparents, they are higher up gods above you. But you're all gods in your domain, and you create creation just like. And so God, they believe that the God that brought Jesus, who knows how many eons ago, was once a regular person who happened to reach that degree. And so this entire universe is that God's domain, right? So it's very interesting how much divergence of thought there can be from not knowing the relationship between the manifestation of God and God. And it took until the coming of Baha'u'llah to make these things very clear to us, right? And set such a beautiful, even succinct but clear framework of reality for us to be able to, really enjoy understanding, have a clearer idea of. What do you guys think? I find it amazing. What about you guys?
When I was talking to my other friend who's Muslim, she was telling me that some Sufis believe in false things. She's Sunni Muslim. I know within Sunni there's other sects too, but I think it's really interesting how even within one religion, there's so much contention. Except for our religion, we don't really have like sects, but a lot of people don't even like a lot of Muslims like shun the Sufis, and even the Islamic Republic, I don't think they treat Sufi Muslims well. I just thought of that when you were talking about that because I don't think the other Muslims believe that the transcendence. I think that I think it's just only Sufis that, but as far as I know. And I also know that Sufis are more into like poetry and listening to music. I don't know if that has to do with transcendence too, but I don't know. If anyone knows more about it, I think that would be.
Yeah, exactly. No, they love the mysticism aspect of religion, and mysticism and transcendence go together. And remember, Baha'u'llah, he wrote the 7 valleys and 4 valleys to address the more mystic side of all religion. So, the Baha'i faith has a very rich. All religions have mysticism. It's an essential part of them, and the Baha'i faith is no exception. And not only is it no exception, it's actually very rich, in mysticism. But it also puts mysticism in its proper place, where the goal of a Baha'i, in terms of like the purpose of a Baha'i, isn't to immerse oneself in mysticism and be carried away, and to become a monk and become an ascetic and just meditate all day, or do these dervish dances to try to, become closer to God. So the things that Sufis do in their practices and their rituals, the whole point is to become one with the Creator. That's the object of their desire. That's their goal. And what Baha'u'llah did is he helped us. He forged for us a very clear a clear path on how to do that, and he forged that path in the reality of our day-to-day lives. He says that working for the betterment of the world is the path of drawing closer to God, right? Following his, and you can do that best through following the laws that he has prescribed for us, right? And the principles that apply those laws. So we are on that, as I think was it Ruhiya Khanum that says that, I'm not sure, but he said, we are on that mystical path, but with practical feet. That's the saying. And so, it's something else to be thankful for, that in this dispensation. All right, shall we move on to the next paragraph? this last paragraph? So Sorush, it's your turn to popcorn.
Carmelia.
Okay, so I'm gonna thus you see that however how much this mineral may progress, its progress remains within its own degree. You cannot possibly bring this crystal, for example, to a state where it gains the power of sight. The moon, howsoever it may progress, can never become the shining sun, and its apogee and perigee will always remain within its own degree. And however far the apostles might have progressed, they could have never become Christ. It is true that coal can become a diamond, but both are in the mineral degree and their constituent parts are the same.
Couple of vocab words in there. What does apogee and perigee mean?
All these degrees, and I still don't know these words. I'm gonna look them up right now.
Sorush beat you to it.
The farthest point in
Oh, he
the
did?
Yeah, I just look at the screen. Yeah, go ahead. Say it, Sam.
it's just the farthest point and the nearest point within like the orbit.
Yeah. And that can also apply to things in existence. Well, in the sense of that how Abdul-Baha is explaining this idea, right? So the highest point in the development of something, the climax of something, the peak of something would be the apogee. And then the perigee would be the opposite of that, right? So, all right, Suresh, we could go back to the, yeah, that's a nice picture. So there's a good pictorial description of that. So this concept that the moon, however it progresses, it will never become a shining sun. He takes this example and then he likens it with the difference between Peter and Christ. Also, this is an important distinction of why one should never consider, and as Abdul-Baha says, I think it would be, tantamount to blasphemy, that one should never, and I've heard some Baha'is, share their thought that, in 1,000 years we'll realize that Abdul-Baha too was a manifestation or, prophet of God, as one person described it. But, this would actually break the teachings of Baha'i metaphysics, right? That Abdul-Baha Abdul-Baha, first of all, his station is a mystery. It's the mystery of God. But Abdul-Baha in his state, he is not the manifestation of God, right? He is not the manifestation of God. The manifestation of God is in a completely different category, and it's not about reaching. So it's not even enough to reach some state of perfection that would automatically grant you the station of prophethood, right? Abdul-Baha is inherently perfect. So we are to look at him, to follow him, to be as he is. Abdul-Baha is our goal, but Abdul-Baha is, if Baha'u'llah is, and this is all, you guys already know this, Baha'u'llah, we liken him to the sun. So the manifestations of God are the sun of reality. Abdul-Baha is the moon, the perfect moon reflecting the light of Baha'u'llah perfectly. But nonetheless, and this is the thing that has to be understood and transmitted without any confusion, is that it's a perfect reflection, but it's a reflection. It doesn't have its own inherent light that it gives. So Abdul-Baha's light is not manifest from the depths of his own soul. It's reflected from his soul or through his soul from the manifestation of God. That the role of the manifestation is to propagate the light. They're the point source, if you will. And then Abdu'l-Baha is the perfect mirror that we all ascribe, that we all aspire to become. And if we are very clear on this with ourselves, and we can also use that same analogy to differentiate the essence of God and the manifestation of God in like manner. That the essence of God is now the essence of God is the sun, and the manifestations of God are the rays of that sun. And Abdu'l-Baha is the perfect mirror that reflects that the rays of that sun. Then we can not only understand the unity of all the manifestations, all the prophets, all the religions, we can clearly understand the role of everything from God to the human being as well. So this, this ringstone symbol becomes more clear to us, its meaning. And so many of the religious wars and strifes and whatnot should automatically cease just by reading this, just by understanding this. Yeah? Wonderful. Any other thoughts, comments? If not, I think we did it. We're good. We finished the chapter. Yay. With 30 minutes to spare.